What's up, alumni? Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele. We're continuing with our alumni stories of health and wellness. This week, we get to welcome back one more time my friend and coworker, Chase Reed. And this time around, Chase is going to tell us about how a job that she loved and believed in, was having a significant negative impact on her wellness. And she's going to share about the difficult decision to leave that job and lean into the Lord's gentle leading, even though it took her into unknown terrain. So, here's Chase, and this one's for you, alumni. Chase, one more time, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, I'm loving being back again.
Yes, it's great. Always glad to have a friend back on the podcast. Chase, you were here just a few weeks ago with us talking about mental health and wellness in the midst of transition, what it looks like to be prepared for a few things and to tend well to our mental health and transition. Today, you're gonna tell us a story, and we're gonna dig into some of your own recent season of life and big decisions that were made and impacts on broader health and wellness. We'll get into all of those things in just a moment here, but for those who didn't tune in, maybe people want a fuller introduction, they can listen to our last conversation, our previous one, but help us get to know you a little bit just in case people missed it last time.
Yes. So my name is Chase Reed. I live in Denver, Colorado with my husband, Will. We've been here for a little over 3 years now since we graduated from college. And I am a therapist who is not currently practicing. And yes, we'll get into that story a little bit more. But I formerly worked with InterVarsity on the alumni team, actually. Yes. And so we have a fun intersection here of having worked with the alumni team at InterVarsity, also working in the mental health space, and also being a human who has my own journey with mental health. So
exactly. Yes. And as we've said, you're someone who has had lots of experience with transition over the last few years. And so you just know full well what so many of our alumni are experiencing right now. Mm-hmm. And Chase, as you know, we've been going through a series on health and wellness. You joined us for an episode, as we said, looking at mental health. And now we're turning our attention to stories of our alumni. And as a team member, you are an alum, and so I'm excited to hear some of your story and what some big decisions that you've had to make in life, the impact that they've had on health and wellness, and sort of how some of that has played out for you, even just very recently here. So Chase, set the scene for us. Give us whatever backstory is helpful, and then just paint us a picture of what's been going on in the last few months for you here.
Yes. So, as I mentioned, I graduated from my graduate program in May of this year. So I moved out here, like I said, straight from undergrad, immediately jumped into a 3-year program to pursue my master's in clinical mental health counseling with the intention of becoming a licensed professional counselor out here in Colorado. And so I jumped right in, which is not something that people typically do, just tacking on another 3 years after undergrad. So I did that, graduated in May, and I'm a very linear thinker, and I've definitely thought about my career very linearly. Like I said, rare to jump in to grad school in the counseling space right after undergrad, but I knew this is what I want to do. I'm going to get my degree, get my license, and be a therapist for the rest of my career. And so I had spent my last 9 months of school doing an internship, as we do, and had been working at an agency that provided, it's a very niche population, provided all court mandated therapy. So all of our clients were on probation and getting therapy as a part of their probation and as required by the court. And in that space, we ended up serving a lot of people struggling with substance abuse and addiction, because to be on probation, you have to be sober. So if that's hard, then you're going to need help with that. So as you can imagine, a lot of people that at least at first did not want to be there. The agency I worked for was incredible, and just excellent clinicians. And as soon as clients got there, they typically realized, oh, these people actually care about me, and actually see me for more than what I've done criminally, and even the substance abuse struggles that I've had. And we were able to build trust really quickly. So I did that as my internship. We did a lot of group therapy and individual therapy. And so I really went into my internship experience saying, I want to do something hard. Like, I can do the kind of sentiment that I can do anything for 9 months. And this is my training. This is the time to learn and be formed. And I was really excited about that. And I loved my internship experience, and it was hard, which, like I said, I went into it knowing that and anticipating that. And then as my final year of school was coming to a close, of course, was wrestling with, okay, do I want to stay here? Do I want to try something different? What do I want to do after graduation? And I ultimately made the decision to continue to work at that agency. I had built such strong relationships with my clients, with my supervisor and my other coworkers. And again, kind of imagined myself like staying there for the early years of my career. I didn't ever necessarily see it for my entire career, but thought like, this is the time to grind. So let's do it. And so that is what I did. And fast forward a few months, the entire month of September, I ended up finding myself just feeling an uncharacteristic anxiety. My story is that I've experienced throughout my adult life, like periods of anxiety, but it definitely isn't my baseline. But I'm talking like, I wake up in the morning and the first thought, like my heart's immediately racing. My mind is racing with what's going on that day. And I struggled with that for about a month, and it took time to figure out where that was coming from. My husband and I were trying to think through all of, right. There's so many things that could be causing it. And so we were trying to think through all the things. And ultimately there was a point where my husband was able to point out, like, you don't feel this way on the weekends. You only feel this way on work days before you go into work. And so I would say in the midst of the chaos, it was not clear what was happening and what was causing it. But I'll never forget, there was a Tuesday morning where, again, was just really struggling that morning, getting ready to go into work. And my husband just looked at me and said, I don't know what is happening, but like something needs to give. Like this, he looked at me and said, I think you need to quit. Wow. And so it happened very quickly. I ended up having a conversation with my supervisor that morning, who she had been kept in the loop to a decent amount. It's a funny thing in the mental health space where your supervisor is also a therapist. So it's a little bit of a different line than maybe the corporate world, for example. Yeah. But she had been kept into the loop to the degree that she needed to be. So anyways, it happened very quickly from there.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Those, and speaking also from experience, those mornings in particular of waking up and the first thing that comes to your mind is not a sense of like wonder, and not that every day you need to wake up like just excited about what you're going to do next. What could happen today? That's that's certainly not my thing, but there's a difference between waking up sort of just in anticipation of stepping into what is to come versus waking up and the first thing you think is, I do not want to get out of this bed. Like I cannot even imagine how I'm going to make it through the work that needs to be done today. And oh man, Chase, I've been there. I've had those experiences and those conversations around like something has got to give here, because long term, this is going to turn into stuff that is just really unhealthy at work and at home and in the spaces in between. Yeah,
exactly. And it was really right. Like, I'm talking about this now with a few months of hindsight perspective on what was going on. But of course, in the midst of it, it felt really disorienting because I did love my job. I did feel really strongly about why my work was so important, right? Like this is one of the most disadvantaged people groups in the city that I live in. And oftentimes disadvantaged people groups get really poor clinical care. And so the fact that I was working alongside clinicians that were excellent at their job, like real change was happening, it felt, it felt incredibly important and even intertwined with, for me, like why I felt like what I felt like God was doing with me in the place that I live. And so that was, like I said, disorienting and just hard to know what's happening and why. And I feel like I'm supposed to be here, and yet I'm like struggling so much. And I feel incredibly grateful for like having another person in my life, in my scenario, my husband, that, you know, he is standing on steady ground. I feel all over the place, and he is able to observe and say, hey, this is what needs to happen. Because when you're in that space, it feels, you feel incredibly incapable of making a major life decision.
Yes.
Because there's so much lack of trust in self. And so, yeah.
Okay. So then help us just get a feel for like, you know, as you were walking through this, what were some of the ways that this was sort of bouncing into other parts of your life? Like what was the overflow of this experience into other spaces that were becoming unhealthy for in whatever capacity you're able to share, and it's appropriate to share. But then also, like, how was it that you started to discern the difference between this is a hard start and this is the wrong fit? Like, how did those that overflow, that stuff bleeding into the rest of your life, like, where was it that you started to figure out, like, okay, something needs to change here. It's not just a hard start.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And like I said, I think over the course of that month, I entered different phases of that. Honestly, for the first few weeks of it, it was just like, okay, this is hard. And I know this is hard. I've experienced even working in the same job a year prior, like this was hard, and we got through it. If I'm being honest, a lot of the discernment came from, again, regular time with God and like seeking him and asking him. And for those first few weeks, it was like, this is really hard, and this feels like suffering, and this is really painful some days. And I still have the sense that this is where I'm supposed to be.
Wow.
And so it was just like honest conversations with God, bringing him tears some mornings, and like sitting with him in the discomfort. And so I mentioned that Tuesday morning when Will finally looked at me and said, hey, like, I think you need to quit your job. About an hour before that, we had been, our church here in Denver does weekly prayer rooms. And it's been a rhythm of mine this semester to be at the 7 a.m. prayer room on Tuesday morning. And actually during that same morning, so a couple hours prior to Will and I's conversation, I remember the first 30 minutes not even being able to like read through in my head the psalm that we were praying through together. I was so in another place. And then finally, the last 30 minutes of that time, that was the first time that I got a sense of release from God. That was like, hey, this is not, you don't have to do this. And I think that was an encouragement that a lot of friends had given me too, is this is a really hard job. And just because it's hard doesn't mean that you have to be the one to do it. which is on par. So I think what I'll share more about too is, a lot of this transition for me, a lot of the decision, even the aftermath of the transition, has been shedding some pretty intense expectations that I've had on myself, that like for as long as I can remember, I've put a lot of identity in, I can do hard things well, I can do hard things with ease. And so the fact that really 3 months into working full time at this job, I essentially had to say, like, I can't do this. I don't have it in me right now. And I have found so much freedom in being able to say that, name that to supervisors, name that to family, name that to friends. And I think when people ask me like what I've learned in the past few months, right, like sitting with this decision that I've made, the fact that I'm now working like a very random odd job in the midst of transition while I like figure out what's next.
Yeah.
I think what I actually am starting to believe, and we hear this all the time in Christian circles, but I'm actually starting to believe that there is strength and weakness because and I have just had a positive experience of how people have responded to my transition, because I went into it fully expecting people to like look down on me, right? Because these are the expectations I had of myself. But even like the director of the agency that I was working at, like honoring me and what I was able to give, honoring me for like being able to recognize what was going on and step back. Not just for my sake, but also this was a huge part of my decision, right? Like the sake of my clients. I didn't feel reliable enough to show up and give them the care that they deserved. And so anyways, actually receiving from other people like, wow, we really honor you for the fact that you recognized that you needed space. So I feel immensely grateful for that. But I think that's also encouragement that I would give to others is oftentimes our performance and our achievement is not like, that is truly not where our identity lies. I remember, last thing I'll share is like one of my friends, actually the day that I quit, said to me, being impressive is so underrated when our security is, or how did she say it? Being impressive is underrated when the security we have in Christ is so much greater. Like, and I think that has been a massive lesson for me over the past couple months.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that are coming up for me as you're sharing these things, Chase. And one of them is like the difficulty of walking away from something that either you have invested tons of time and effort and emotion and money into and coming to terms with like, maybe this is not the right spot, or maybe that was a season and now it's done. And also not just the investment, not just wanting to stick around because of an investment that you've made of some element of the resources that God has given you, but also if you sense a real calling into this thing and you have just insane levels of compassion for the people that you're working with and you believe in what you're doing. Right. There can just be so much shame tied up in, well, if I'm not doing this, like, what could I possibly do that would be as meaningful or important as this? Right. And those things can make us hold on to things that we shouldn't hold on to for way too long. Those, as you're saying, your identity being in Christ, not in the accomplishments that you make in these places, and that our calling is so much broader than we oftentimes give God credit for. And that he can use none of the stuff is wasted. That he can use these experiences to continue shaping and narrowing and dialing in how it is that he's calling us. That those can be really powerful but difficult things. And the other thing that stands out to me is that a lot of times now, okay, I want to qualify this, that in our culture, I think we have to be very thoughtful about the way that we think about suffering. You use the word suffering, and like there are times that we do just have to suffer. Like that is just part of it. And we can naturally, because we are such a high comfort society, like we can just run the other direction from suffering that is good for us. So I don't want this to be a ban against suffering. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes I do think that we can opt into suffering unnecessarily. And because of a misunderstanding, to say, if it doesn't suck, then I must not be following Jesus. And like that is a lie that I have bought into. That sometimes there are certainly times, and big picture, like following Jesus is hard because we make countercultural decisions. But his calling is also life-giving. Like his burden is light, his yoke is easy. It is not this soul crushing thing to lean into our calling, even if it can be hard. So that can also be like things that are just super tough to make those decisions of stepping away from things that we think are very important. And maybe we have a misread on where and how we're supposed to suffer.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, it was a shift that happened in one morning for me, right? Like I said, there was a period where it was like, no, this is it. And I'm learning to suffer well with God. And then it shifted and the Lord said, hey, you don't have to do this. Will said the same thing. I don't think this is necessarily what God wants for you. It's hard. And this is life with God. It's not prescriptive in that way. And someone else might not necessarily be able to look at you and say, oh, well, this is how you know. But it comes from walking with God, knowing the shepherd's voice and trusting him where he's leading, even when it feels unclear.
Yeah. So Chase, as you continue on this journey, 2-part question here, like what are you learning about balancing work and your health and wellness? And where is Jesus showing up in the midst of this with you as well?
I think I'll start with the second question, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Just like I was saying about the decision to step away, it came from like listening to the shepherd's voice and seeing where he was going. That has been what I have been learning in the midst of even after having stepped away and figuring out, okay, what's next? Because I stepped away and thinking like, I stepped away with the sense that this, like the mental health field and being a therapist, I was certainly not done with. Felt really confident that I would end up back there, but I didn't know if that would be in 3 months, 6 months, a year. I had no idea.
Wow.
I had no idea. And so, yes, in this time, like I said, kind of working an odd job, doing something very task oriented with my hands and very much not with my mind and my heart. And so, which has been amazing. It's given me a lot of just space to be and not think about work before or not think about work after, awesome. Which feels like a privileged space. But it's just been really nice to have the space. And it's allowed me like a lot of, like I said, downtime with God to let him meet me. And so I actually do now know that in the middle of January, I will be going, I don't know when this episode will be live, but in January, I will be going back to work part-time as a therapist, working more in a like private practice setting alongside a small group of other therapists. So going back into therapy, but like I said, starting much more part-time, not jumping back into the deep end right away. And then getting to work with really whoever. So like kids, teens, adults. Yes, just getting, like I said, more of a private practice setting. But it's been like, even as I've stepped into that, even as I've accepted that job, there's been a lot of emotions and like balancing excitement while also some nerves of like, what if I end up in the same exact spot mentally? And so, the way that I've experienced God in this transition has been, again, a lot of the identity pieces that it's like, my identity really is not in what I do. And also that he does desire to give us rest. And he is a God who delivers us from like really painful experiences and really painful like headspaces. And then I think another way that I've experienced God is that like he actually does have plans for our lives. Like he actually does have hopes and dreams. And it's been really fun to dream with God about like what he has for me. And sometimes like you have these small like inklings and you're like, I don't really know what that means. That feels so vague, but I just kind of continuing to hold that before the Lord and invite him to reveal more of that in whatever timing he wants. But it's honestly been a very fun time with God.
Yeah. Yeah, as you're talking about that of sort of partnering with God in this season of your life, it takes me back actually to part of our conversation a few weeks ago as we were talking about internal and external locus of control, like that as you partner with God in the midst of this, that there is a certain element of like, God knows, he has plans, he has hopes and dreams, but also there's this mysterious thing where I can bring my excitement and my wondering and my, hey God, what if kind of questions to him, and to see where those things go. And again, if we believe that God is always the same, we also see these really interesting stories in scripture of people like bringing something up to God, and at least the way that we read it, it seems like he changes his mind about stuff. And so whatever that mysterious interaction is, however it's actually operating, it's clear that we can bring these things to God and say, what do you think about this? Like, I think this could be super cool. Is there any way for this to be worked into what I'm doing in some way? And obviously the answer could be no, but the answer could also be yes. and maybe not yes in the way that we might anticipate, but it could still be yes in some way. And what does it look like to be a participant with God, to take some ownership in the process of where we're going, and to say like, God, I don't know ultimately I know that I'm spending eternity with you, and so I'm good. Like my hope is secured. So I got some serious like leeway for whatever mysterious things you have in store. But also, I just wonder if we could try this out together. What might this look like? And partnering with God in those things is such a cool thing to get to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's so great. Chase, once again, I asked you this at the end of our last conversation, but here again, in thinking about these elements of your story that you've shared with us, thinking about work and wellness and life balance and all, and inviting God into that with you, is there a final parting word of encouragement that you would give to young alumni who are right in the middle of a serious life transition right now?
I think the biggest, like I said, one of the biggest things I've gained from the past few months has just been like releasing the grip that I had on what I thought my life would look like, and how I thought the start of my career would go, how I thought like everything would just like move so linearly. And I think I would encourage just like, don't be scared to loosen the grip on that. Don't be scared for things to change, because you will be okay. Like it is true that God will take care of you. And there actually has been so much more for me in making some really scary decisions to step away. There's been so much more that God has offered me than if I had just kind of kept my head down and like just kept grinding it out, because that's what I thought I needed to do.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's really great. Gosh, Chase, thank you so much thanks for joining us for both of these conversations. Thanks for your openness and willing to share. Like these can be parts of life that can be very easily sort of just kept behind closed doors, or they can be conversations that can help encourage people as they experience the same or something similar. And so there's just so much wisdom in the stories that you've shared and your response to those things. And just the journey that you've been on with Jesus through all of this. I'm grateful for you helping us learn from you and from your experiences, so that we can be thoughtful about not just thoughtful, but hopeful, about what it looks like to step into some of these mysteries, to experience things that could feel like failure, and to say there is something next. There's something that's coming next, and what is it that God has in store? I'm hopeful for what He's got next for me. So I appreciate that very much, Chase.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for letting me tell my story, and hopefully it can be an encouragement to someone else.
I really appreciate that phrase Chase used, loosening the grip. Whether it's a job that was supposed to be the job, a relationship that was supposed to be the one, or any other element of the important life plans we make, it's easy to hold them too tightly and then be closed to the possibility that there's another, better option that God might have in store for us. And And that's not to make light of or just breeze past the true, understandably difficult thing that it is to see something fall apart that in our mind was supposed to be a sure thing. It's not easy. But if we cling to Jesus instead of our plan, if we strengthen our grip on the Lord, then we can be certain that we are holding on to the one and only sure thing. And the rest will become a little easier to let go of when we need to. Not easy, but easier. Chase, thanks again for joining us and for sharing your story. We need these reminders of holding tightly to the right thing. Alumni, come back next week as we wrap up our wellness series with my conversation from 2023 with Dr. Louis Tay, an expert in the area of well-being or optimal functioning. Dr. Tay's work helps answer questions around living life well and finding fulfillment. And Dr. Tay's expertise feels like an excellent way to end this series. Lots of great insights coming your way next week. Until then, consider sharing this episode with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Thanks for listening to After 4. This podcast is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Centera, edited by Caleb Leppert, and our After 4 theme music was written and performed by John Steele.